So the understanding, as I spoke about in the meditation, is that in IFS, we understand that we have many different parts. This is so conducive to psychedelic work. It just overlays so beautifully on it. And so much of the theoretic approach is really looking at the part system with the psychedelic journey. And I use IFS heavily during the integration phase and understanding mystical experiences, which will weave itself in this seminar. IFS is very open-ended. It can be a very mystical process, and it's an open-ended system that allows whatever our clients' religious or spiritual beliefs are can be plugged into the template of IFS, which makes it lend itself very well to mystical experiences and integration. So many of us focus on the journey itself, but what happens after the psychedelic journey really determines the healing. Epiphanies and mind-blowing experiences are really the easy part, and the real work starts after the journey. So how do we bring these amazing epiphanies that we have in psychedelic experiences back into our day-to-day life? This is really the challenge. I was trained very, very early in psychedelic therapy. And all the trainings that I attended really focused on the safety and keeping the journey itself safe and how to work with people while they're in the journey space. And they would kind of mention integration, but it was just kind of an afterthought, like mention preparation, talk a lot about the journey, how to do music, how to hold space and all of that. And then not enough, it was kind of an afterthought to talk about integration. And I've really found that integration is the most important part of the whole thing. Having mind-blowing experiences is pretty easy, but how do you translate that into, your work, how you deal with your family, how you go on? We don't want to have that psychedelic experience, that truth, that compassion, that love, that self energy that we feel when we're deep in the journey, to get lost and almost exiled because we go back to a world that doesn't reflect that at all. Um, a really big thing that's very common is that people go too deep too fast without containment on the back end. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But that's a really big problem with psychedelic journeys, that there's such an incoherence with the depth of the journey and the expansiveness that was felt, and then coming back to the quote real world, and having that not be reflected at all. So there isn't enough containment for landing back into day-to-day life. I say at all my retreats that, because I do all of these group retreats and people get into these really profoundly intimate relationship with the cohort that they're in, because they've been so vulnerable going through these journeys together and so uh, connected with each other. And then they go back into their day-to-day life where they're socially isolated or don't feel that level of intimacy with people. And people say, oh, I guess I have to go back to the real world now. And I always say, that isn't the real world. Humans have evolved to be really deep in tribal relationships and community relationships and to process things in community. This is the real world. The retreat world is the real world. And the way that we're living, being socially isolated and staring at glowing rectangles all day, our phones or whatever, is not actually how humans have evolved to live. And so our job as facilitators and therapists is to really help people translate that deep connection that they felt to themselves, their internal ecosystem, and to the cohort of people, if you're doing a retreat with people, to help them translate that into their daily life. And it's hard. It's not an easy task to do because we're really working uphill from a system that is very socially isolating. So it's really important as practitioners to help create a place where clients can track their parts and how they've changed, so that they have a way to measure the shifts that they've had, to measure the benefits that they've received from the retreat or the experience that they've had with you. Another really important aspect is if you are leading retreats. I talk about retreats in groups a lot because I prefer to work this way. I really understand that group experiences can be extremely beneficial for many reasons. You're really potentiating the healing where, you're using the medicine as a healing agent, the therapist or the facilitator is a healing agent. But then when you have a retreat setting where you have a beautiful retreat center and you have a group of people that is deeply witnessing one another, that also potentiates the healing. I know today's topic isn't about retreats, but I really encourage people to think about working in retreat setting or group setting because it is so powerful. So if you are working in a group setting or a retreat setting, part of the integration needs to be to help clients who attended keep the energy in their cohort alive and active. And often that has to be online. So creating a structure for clients to be able to come back to the group experience and talk to each other and help one another integrate. Um, so again, the epiphany is really the easy part, but how to weave the insights into daily life is much more challenging. So let's talk about what happens after, like some of the problems that arise. This is what we often see: rubber banding, underwhelm, and punishing parts. So let's go into a little bit more depth about what each of those are. So rubber banding, or some people call it backlash, is when a client comes in and they have an amazing experience. It's just so mind-blowing and really opens them up. And, they have this profound insight. Their, depression and anxiety is gone. And then they come back, and as their parts repopulate and come back online, right? When we have our protectors, when we're in a journey, what happens is our protectors kind of go to sleep and are offline. They fade back and they're off duty while the journey's happening. And then they come back online as clients come back after the journey. And we can have a rubber banding effect where the depression, the anxiety comes back online, and it's extremely disappointing for clients because they felt the contrast of not having that be so pervasive. And so it's almost like the rubber banding effect can be where they feel worse after the journey than they felt before the journey, right? They kind of had cobbled together manager parts that had kept them going along in their depression or anxiety, felt the expansion and the awareness of not having all of those parts online. And then afterward, it's like, oh, I don't have all those coping mechanisms that I had before, or I have more insight into those protectors. And I actually feel worse because they were kind of helping me hobble along in my life. And now I don't have access to them like I did before. So that's one thing that we see after journeys that can be problematic. An interesting one, less common but happens, is underwhelm. So clients have a journey, I'd say about 80% of people have very florid visuals and hallucinations in psychedelic journeys. About 20% of people do not have really strong visuals, and that's something that they expected. So they're underwhelmed. They had, just a landscape of gray or black forms, and they're really disappointed. They're very underwhelmed after the journey. I had a really interesting client who had suffered a bout of really bad depression that came after losing her dog. And she went into the ketamine journey, and it was just gray and black sticks and white sand landscapes. And it was very depressing. And her whole journey was very depressing. And she came out and she was just underwhelmed. Like, wow, I thought I was going to have this, beautiful, colorful, hallucinogenic journey and get me out of this gray that I've been feeling this whole time. And really, the work in integration was helping her parts understand that underwhelm, needing witnessing, right? Needing to slow down and deeply witness how barren their experience had been, how sad they had been, how deep that grief was. And so, really, the work that we did after the journey was so fruitful because we were able to work with that as the parts that were showing her content that she needed to pay attention to, right? So the work in the integration was so much more important than the work during the journey, right? That she didn't have these florid visuals. We can also see punishing parts. So it's kind of related to rubber banding, but a little bit different. Sometimes when people are really deep in a journey and their protectors are offline, they reveal secrets that have not been spoken. It is not uncommon at all. I have it happen all the time where people remember traumas that they've buried and exiled into their unconscious mind, and that percolates up during the psychedelic session. And so, what can happen is as those protectors come back online on the back end of the journey, as people return to normal mind, those parts can be very punishing during integration. They can say things to the client like, "How dare you reveal secrets that should never be revealed? You shouldn't have gotten your hopes up. This is, you're a bad person for doing drugs." You can have all kinds of punishing parts that come on afterward. And it's really important to be aware of this potential as clinicians. What I've really seen is when we do our work on the front end, when we do work with preparation, you can see less of these issues on the back end. So, what does that mean? It means on the front end, when we're doing preparation for with our clients, we're really watching for things like that this is their last hope, that they have parts that are over enthusiastic, right? We don't want to feed into that kind of narrative. We want to work with those parts and let them know that there are no guarantees, that working with psychedelics is an ongoing relational situation. It's not a one and done. I've never really seen someone do one session and then all of their trauma and all of their issues are gone. It doesn't work that way. So really managing expectations and then working with protectors. So before the journey, I go in and I really slow down and make sure all the protectors are on board with how deep the medicine journey is. So really the answer to this question about post-journey crash is not only providing really good integration for folks on the back end after the journey, but working with protector systems and doing your prep beforehand, not going too deep too soon with the medicine, not too much medicine, working with a protector system, and then having adequate integration. And then I want to talk a little bit about islands of coherence, validating that shift through shared experience and shared meaning. So, what are islands of coherence? This is a term that I've created that's been inspired by Nate Hagens, who talks about the meta crisis in a different realm. But the way I see islands of coherence is creating circles to provide safe and resonant spaces for participants to connect, to share their language. So there's a shared language about their experience and build communities rooted in compassion and shared vision. So even if you're not doing a retreat or a group, helping your clients by giving them some resources to join groups, join integration groups, can be extremely beneficial for people because if they don't have a family or a circle, a social circle that validates their experience, there can be a lot of incoherence when they come back to their day-to-day life, and it can really dismiss the changes that they could make. And so I really strongly recommend creating islands of coherence for your journeyers, right? Having shared meaning, places that psychedelic journeyers can return to remind them of their profound journey and shared meaning and shared language. So this is something that's really important to help people weave the expansiveness of their mystical experience, their expansiveness of their awareness of self into their day-to-day life, to have reminders, to have this island of coherence that they can come back to and to be reinforced and validated with the changes that they've made. I've found this to be one of the most important components of psychedelic work. In the Theradelic approach and the integration framework, I've been developing this within, between, and beyond way of thinking about integration. People like Ken Wilber in Integral Theory and other developmental psychologists talk about how people need to work on their own autobiographical material, their own issues, personal issues first, before thinking about how they relate to people relationally and then in the world. And I totally disagree with this. in IFS, we understand, and in archetypal psychology, we understand as above, so below. The micro is the macro and vice versa. So my understanding is that we can work with these things concurrently if we give a system during integration for our clients to understand this framework. So within anchoring insights into the internal ecosystem of parts, creating secure attachment to the internal world, breath, movement, sensation tracking, all of this is helping clients go inside. That meditation that we just did is an internal ecosystem parts exercise. So you're helping clients understand that. What's happening inside of me? How do I create internal secure attachment? We're also talking to our clients concurrently with noticing their reaction to the parts in those people closest to us. So, my wife drives me crazy. I came back from the retreat and she's like, why haven't you changed? So his wife has parts that are activated around wanting him to change. And then he has parts that meet his wife's parts that are defensive protectors, right? So helping clients understand that it's not just how we relate to our internal system of managers and protectors and exiles, but also how do we relate to the world that's close around us, our circle around us, right? So helping reframe, doing meaning making shifts, looking at that relational community around us, repairing attachment wounds to those closest to us. So weaving this as therapists into our language, working with our clients. And then beyond, what's happening in the larger system and society. Earlier, I just said, people go back to this traumatizing culture of being socially isolated on social media that's, has really crazy algorithms that are keeping us feeling isolated and polarized. We see, for example, in the United States, there's an incredible polarization happening. It's even woven into our relationship. We can look at this as part system, that there are protectors that are polarized against each other, and we can help our clients recognize that and how they are reacting to this larger system, the beyond system.